Subscribe strategically. Jacek Bartosiak in conversation with 𝗻𝗻𝗀 on Trump's new term, Strategy and Future.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy and Future. And today my guest is Professor Louis Simon. Hi, Louis. How are you?
Hey, Jacek. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. After quite a while,
Been a
especially
while.
we are talking in the midst of this havoc after the Munich conference. Just for the record, Louis Simon is director of CSDS in Brussels, if that's correct, and at Elcano Institute in Madrid. I hope I didn't confuse anything, Luis. And a foremost geostrategic thinker, very frequently writing about transatlantic relations, the pivot to the Pacific, U.S. pivot to the Pacific, and evolution of the military warfare and strategic concepts. Frequent voice in the Western geostrategic debate, and so on and so forth. I mean, for you to know, Louis, the Polish audience knows you. So for the Poles who will be listening, nothing that we just said wouldn't be surprised. But let's get started. Yeah, off the record, we started touching. Before I press the button record, we discussed this exchange of salvos between Zelensky and Trump in the broader context, of course, of the peace deal that is being negotiated by the Americans, and this new kind of a stance by the new U.S. administration vis-a-vis Europe, Russia, and Ukraine. So if we could just start from here, if you just could say what you really think, what's the grand concept that the Americans have in their mind?
Thanks, Jacek. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm wondering when this is going to be. I know when it's being recorded, but when it's going to be aired, because every day is a world here. I mean,
I will tell you right away that in original English it will be published today, but with a Polish voiceover.
Okay.
It will be published in the first week of March.
Then let's hope that nothing huge happens between now and when you publish it, because things are moving so fast. Well, I mean, I think the very simple answer to your question as to what is the strategy behind it is I have no clue. But of course I can speculate, no, like everybody can. The first is there a strategy? As you know, there are a lot of people saying that it's all improvisation and or that there's a strategy, is very amateur, is very naive, so on and so forth. My sense is that there is a strategy behind what the Trump administration is doing or how it is approaching Ukraine. My sense is that the statements by Vance and by Hegseth and by Trump and by others. Of course, there's always room for improvisation and spontaneity always. But my sense is that it was a certainly well choreographed operation and well sequenced, and that there is a strategy. Now, what the ultimate goal behind that strategy is that I do not know. I think there is a bunch of things that we know. One is that Trump has said repeatedly, and so have his people, that he wants to end the war. That was a campaign promise that he would at least try to end the war. That he wants peace. He's also said, and so have his people, although we can try to unpack this later because there are contending views on this second point, that he wants to focus on China. Hegseth did say that explicitly at NATO headquarters. And in the war, of course, helps them do that, even though the Biden administration, we can also talk about that, also justified the decision to support Ukraine in China-related terms. But they said that they want to prioritize, that they need to focus, that the strategic realities are such that the Indo-Pacific region and China require most of the U.S. attention. And from that perspective, and from that of other people that are in DoD circles, is clear. They've been consistent on that for many years, and they are now delivering on what they've been announcing for a while. And third, I don't know how much this matters. I don't know how serious this is. I don't know how realistic it is. But third, it seems that they want to go for some form of course correction in terms of U.S.-Russia relations, right? Whether they want to drive a wedge between Russia and China, how realistic that is, that's a whole other debate, right? But it seems like they want to go for some form of course correction in the relationship with Russia. Now, now, the question is where Europe fits into all this and what this means for U.S. strategy in Europe. By the way, just also wanted to say that there's been a lot of noise and speculation about how naive it is for the United States to think it can manipulate the relationship between China and Russia and flip Russia against China and so on. I agree with some of that, but I don't think, I think the discussion on driving a wedge between China and Russia has gotten more nuanced and over the last few years. Tim Crawford from the University of Boston has written quite a lot on wedge strategies and how sometimes wedge strategies do not intend to flip a target. So in this case, the aim would not be to flip Russia against China and bring the Russia to the U.S. camp. It would be merely much more modest and incremental gains so basically to mitigate or minimize the extent of Russia's collaboration with China on certain files. So it would be more like modest and incremental gains. Of course, the risk is that Putin may try to cash in on a U.S. overture and basically just entertain that conversation and then cash it in to try and renegotiate his relationship with Beijing from a position of greater strength and greater terms, right? That is the risk, right? But it seems that this could be a risk worth taking from a U.S. perspective. No, so I think those are sort of the main elements as I see it. The question is. And of course, Trump has made a very strong entry into that conversation. Some people may say by giving in a lot, by giving in too much, by going too far in terms of giving in to Russian demands on Ukraine. On the other hand, you could also argue that, I mean, I remember like 3 weeks ago, which seems like ages ago, people were saying that it was almost impossible to get put into the negotiating table, right? So, well, he's gotten him to the table. It's true that he's gotten him with a very strong entry offer or entry package, but he's now at the table. He's bought into Trump's language of being a man of peace and common sense and so on and so forth. And so I think now what Europeans should do, and we can talk about Europeans and Europe now if you want, is try and make a counteroffer, and one that respects Trump's red lines, but still implicates somehow, even if indirectly and ambiguously, the United States.
Yeah, just let me ask you a few questions. Some of them might be challenging or testing the waters on purpose, you know, for the our conversation to be stirred up a little bit. And also that will be a perspective from the Intermarium, European Intermarium from Warsaw. So question number one is, do you think that this change of posture, of attitude by the new American administration is signaling that the Americans, in fact, are moving towards the offshore balancing in Europe, or they are about to do it, and they are preparing Europe for that? And that creates completely a new ripping effect and the realignment of things on the continent? Or is it too early to say so? That's question number one. Question number two is, do you think that the whole game that US has played over the last 2 weeks, Munich conference, Russia, new Russia opening, that the real target is Europe, not China, not Russia, but Europe, because it is Europe that has to be subdued before United States really embarks on a major technological and trade war with China. And Europe must be on US side no matter what, especially that United States' new economic realities are forcing United States to initiate all incentives for European capital, European industry to move to US, and that is killing European economy. So it's not the incentives that the US is giving to the European countries, but they have to be subdued in order to be obedient in this new game against China, and that's the real reason. And the third and last, how would you react to some claims that United States doesn't have such leverage on Ukraine to compel Ukrainians to peace on the US terms? So United States cannot negotiate over the Ukrainian hands. It's not Afghanistan, it's not South Vietnam. Ukrainian army is fighting. UAVs are being produced by Ukrainian new industry. It's not the case, and this is the army that is fighting a modern warfare, and they have everything they need, and if not, they will get something from Europe. And maybe the last fourth point connected to the third, maybe it's not about decoupling Russia from China, but it might be good enough to sow distrust in Beijing that Russians might be kind of more flexible in the future, and that's good enough for the US to create a real new equilibrium in Eurasia. How would you react to all those four?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a lot. So I'll try not to forget anything, and they're all related. The first two are certainly related. So starting with I'll take them in order. So the intermarium and the US, the future of US posture, the force posture and defense strategy in Europe, are they heading out, or is it too early to say? I think it's yeah, I mean, the short answer again, I mean, to all these questions is I don't know, but obviously, yeah, that would make for a very boring conversation. So I can certainly speculate with all the caveats. I think it's too early for us to know, and I think it's too early to say, in the sense that my sense is that they still haven't figured out what they want, and second, whether they can get what they want in terms of Europe, right? I mean, meaning the new team in Washington in DOD. I think it's pretty clear that they want to downsize. I think that's clear. So we're not talking now about Ukraine, we're talking about NATO posture, right? I assume. Hegseth was very clear that at least in his language at NATO last week, in saying that the US remains committed to Article 5 and the alliance, full stop. He said that very clearly. So it could, I mean, one possible hypothesis or line of thinking here would be, okay, they might be.
Louis, I'm sorry for interfering, but at the same time, on the same day, he said to the NATO allies that, conventional arms, you need to take care of yourself. We can provide the nuclear umbrella.
Yeah.
This is actually offshore balancing par excellence, because high end is ours, but you deliver the meat, guys.
Yeah. No, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So first, I mean, I think there's a lot of room of maneuver for the US to cut in terms of force posture in Europe, while still leaving significant assets in place, particularly after February 2022. There were some increases in terms of assets assigned to EUCOM, not all of them necessarily permanently stationed in Europe, but assigned to EUCOM. So I think there's plenty of there's a post 2022 surplus which could be easily cut and still leave the US in position. It's clear that they want to downsize, or at least that's, I mean, it appears that they want to downsize, partly to focus more on the Indo-Pacific. This is not a new conversation, by the way. What is not clear is what the floor is. That's not clear, and I do not see that much detail there. When I think about those U.S. assets that I wouldn't say that cannot be substituted by Europeans, but I think that it would be very, 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 very difficult to substitute. I mean, other than, enablers, ISR, missile defense, long and intermediate range fires, those are difficult to substitute, not impossible. I think the most difficult to replace would be command and control and the extended nuclear deterrence architecture, which are very much related. Because if the Americans are not in control militarily, if they are not at the top of the command and control pyramid, then the extended nuclear deterrence guarantee has no credibility. And for them to be in control, I think there's a rationale for them also to be in control, which is to manage escalation dynamics and avoid entrapment, right? Which is a key issue always for the patron. That also requires having some assets on the ground. So I think to my knowledge, there hasn't been that much granularity on where the floor is. As I see it, that is the floor. And either you terminate Article 5 and the NATO commitment, and then it's fine, then you can just leave. I mean, that's a possibility, right? Or if you stick to it, you need to stay on top of the command and control architecture and for the nuclear guarantee to be credible. And you will also need some sort of assets on the ground for escalation management purposes. So I think that debate, I don't think it's gotten that specific. Maybe inside DoD circles it has. I mean, I know that there are people with different opinions, but I'm not sure the opinion is fully formed, nor convinced that even if they wanted to go for a really low floor, meaning no assets on the ground whatsoever, and just secure plus the nuclear guarantee, or just the nuclear guarantee with no secure and so on. I'm not even sure that if they wanted to go for such an ambitious downsize, that it would be easy to implement, because then it needs to be negotiated within DoD. It needs to be, I mean, there's Congress, there's politics, there's all kinds of interests, right? So I'm optimistic in the sense that I think they also need to be, if they want Europeans to step up, and it seems to me that the people who are now in the administration or in the vicinity of the administration have been quite consistent on this, they need to scare the hell out of Europeans, because they've tried everything else before. The way they see it, it hasn't worked. So they need to rattle Europeans into thinking that the United States is leaving. And this needs to be a conversation that needs to be waged in simple, understandable, and binary terms. We are leaving. We are off. You need to get your act together. I'm not sure. I personally, I do not think, trying to look at it through the U.S., through what I think is the U.S. national interest, I don't think it's in the U.S. interest to cut loose. It might be in their interest to cut down, but not to cut Europe loose for a whole range of reasons, including your second question, which has to do with Europe. Is it about subduing Europe? Is it about ensuring Europe is on side when it comes to competition with China? Well, Europe is subdued, and Europe is on side when it comes to competition with China. So perhaps it's about turning the screws a bit more in terms of subordination and in terms of a more concrete alignment. I'm not convinced that going hard on Europe is the best way to ensure it's tightly aligned on all things China. You already have voices out there in the European policy and think tank ecosystem saying, well, now we need to go easy on China. For instance, if you go hard in terms of...
Very often we hear. Yeah. 𝗃𝗏𝗏 wrote in Foreign Affairs yesterday about it. 𝗃𝗏𝗏 from Portugal is saying it all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
And how about Brussels? Do people in Brussels and the
Oh yeah, all the time, of course. I mean, in subtle ways, because people want to be need to be cautious and want to be cautious. I mean, some particularly people in positions of responsibility, right, of public service. The Of course, it's not inconceivable to think that the United States, when it comes to Europe, that the Trump administration thinks that when it comes to Europe, they can have their cake and eat it, meaning that they can go hard on Europe and still expect them to be in line, right?
Exactly. That's what they want, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think that sort of relates to your other point, which is that to manipulate European politics, right? I mean, I think Vance was as explicit as someone can be on this, right? The other day in Munich. And he said some interesting things. I mean, he said, as we see it, we have a shared civilization. We are in this together. We're waging a cultural war as we see it. For us, this is very important. And this is a war that is not confined to the United States, because it's a problem or a challenge that we have within our shared civilization. So we need to. We also have skin in the game in terms of the European debate, right? And yes, we are more in line with certain elements of the European public debate. And I think they have a particularly strong stake in the German political debate and in the Polish political debate, it seems to me, because those are two important countries also strategically for the United States. Your third question was, you said no leverage, right? When it comes to Ukraine, I think they do have leverage. I think they have leverage.
Like what, for example?
I mean, the Ukrainian army, yes, it's fighting, it's producing loads of things, but I mean, the level of military aid, financial aid, diplomatic support that is getting from the West has been massive.
But it's now the West is divided. It's Europe and US in that respect.
Well, yes, it is. But look, I think there are I would say a few things here. Which is not to say that the Ukrainians should just give up and do whatever the Americans tell them. Of course, I understand that they are.
Please have in mind that Biden delivered a lot of stuff right after he was removed from office. I mean, he
Yes, no, that's true. That's true. They can.
So Ukrainians are claiming, in my sources in Kiev, that they have 1 year of surplus of ammo and supplies.
Yeah, no, they can certainly. They can, in all likelihood, they can keep going for a while. I'm not saying they can't, but look, I mean, I think I would say that the following things. Number one is the level of aid that has been provided to the Ukrainians up until now has been insufficient, right?
Yeah.
So unless your strategy is to bleed them dry and until the end of time, which I'm not even sure that that's sustainable, even I mean, leaving aside the fact that it's horrible for the Ukrainian people and very cynical and so on. If what you want them is to recover territory or to repel Russia or to get Russia to convince Russia to stop fighting because there's no more give, then you would need more than what you have been provided. So for Europeans to, if that's what you're driving at, for Europeans to replace the United States in terms of maintaining the support infrastructure, they will need to cover the gap of everything that the US has provided that in the military domain has been much more. I know that financially, money-wise, the Europeans have provided more, but in terms of military systems, by the way, which come, as you know, come with training, come with assistance of in all sorts of ways, so it's not that easily replaceable. They will need not only to cover what the US has provided, but they will need to go above and beyond, because the overall contribution that jointly we had was not enough. That would be very. So my point is that it would be very difficult to do with the US on board. Now we're in a situation in which not only the US is not on board, but the US seems to be against it, which makes it even more difficult. So
Louis,
I'm skeptical.
If I may, just because I think that, but the parameters are a bit different. First of all, I think that the Ukrainians, the elites, gave up on the idea of recovering those territories. So war is not about it anymore. War is about creating the architecture that will create conditions for development of the country. Okay, either through NATO, EU, or US security guarantees, or creating the proper balance of power in the intermarium, just to deter Russia from interfering in affairs. They're ready to give in territories. The problem with the US was that they didn't want to create any equilibrium. Instead, it was not about the recovery of territories. United States simply did not deliver anything tangible and substantive to create impression that the war will not, reignite in a month. And this is a completely different story, because that means that the Ukrainians can really create hardship for the US now, because if Trump wants to finish it now, he will lose his face, because he will not be capable of finishing it now. And he will lose credibility. He will lose his agency over Europe. The entire game will be lost by the United States. So United States, I think, made a mistake by creating the conditions for a quick and short-term ending of war, whatever the circumstances, because it's not about territory. You know what I mean? It's not about territories. So I think it was a hubris, and a feeling of hubris, very frequent in US thinking. They created conditions that are very unfavorable for the US to end this war. And Zelensky is playing this tune and is trolling Trump effectively, actually. This was my argument. Yeah. So it's not about the idealistic concept that Ukraine must be provided to win this war of, justice. It's about creating the proper balance of power in the place of war. Yeah, I mean, so that the war could be deterred in the near future. That's good enough, but the United States has not delivered any architecture to do that. So Ukrainians have completely no incentive to finish it, not at all, and that's a different story.
No, I understand what you mean, but barely a few days ago, Zelensky was also talking about peace and that he also wanted peace, right? So everyone was buying into the new peace narrative. He even went as far as saying that he had talked to Trump several times and that he had some good ideas and so on and so forth, right? What you're saying is that they can go on, and that means that Trump will not have the peace that he's promised so soon. Yeah, and that they can create political hiccups for Trump. Yes, they can. But Trump was also saying, as recently as Davos, when they asked him, will the war end? He was also saying you need to ask the Russians, right? So I think what Trump has promised is that he's going to try to end the war. We know that that's very difficult, right? For multiple reasons, because and we knew that from the beginning, right? Because either you go soft on Russia, which means that it becomes very difficult to sell the package to Ukraine and to Europe, or you go hard on Russia, which means that you need a lot of leverage on Russia to end the war, right? So we knew that this was going to be difficult. Whether they've overplayed it, thinking that Zelensky would get in line right away, that I don't know. I think it's too early to tell.
Yeah, but the frustration signals that they really would like him to be removed. Plus,
yes.
Remember that Turkey and Poland are not interested in this peace, in that shape. And Turkey yesterday manifested it. Turks can deliver a lot of weapons to Ukrainians. Yeah. So it's a Eurasian game is far more complex than the Americans are thinking. That it's gonna be like they do like that and everything happens. I think those days are over. The balance of power has changed, and the primacy is gone. The United States cannot shape unilaterally the circumstance on the ground. Maybe my intermarium soul is saying,
not unilaterally, not unilaterally, but it can certainly shape. I mean, it can shape. It can't control. It cannot control.
And speaking, Luis, also you mentioned the extended nuclear deterrence that the United States is providing. You know, in those quarters here in the NATO eastern flank, they are not credible. You know, and you would be amazed at the debate that are here.
On nuclear, on Poland
Yes.
being acquiring, yeah.
Yes, on the nuclear. And you know, if Poland thinks about it, guess what Taiwan, Japan, South Korea think, and Turkey, even more, because we are really very much close to the United States. So United States may lose the grip on the escalation management of situation Eurasia. If
Yeah, I wouldn't bundle everything together because I mean I mean one thing is what you I mean you can extrapolate from what we're seeing in Ukraine, you can extrapolate things for Europe, but to East Asia is different. The signals that the United States is that the new administration is sending in relation to East Asia are not they're not the same. I mean, they're saying that they want to downsize in Europe precisely to beef up in Asia. It's not that we're going to cut loose from everywhere, right? So it's true that in South Korea there's been a very intense debate on nuclear. By the way, and also, I mean, I think the flip side of this debate is that you may now have a Trump administration that is much less interested in North and international order, and it's not inconceivable to think, guys, go ahead and get your nuclear weapon.
exactly, especially if they move towards the offshore balancing. So in Warsaw, I think that they will allow us to do it, like in because then their interests change. It's enough to have the equilibrium.
Yeah.
So things might change. Things might change, but
things are changing. How far they'll change, that we still need to see, because also we do not know where tactics and strategy begins, right? So there's a lot of, I mean, clearly Trump is gearing up for a renegotiation of terms when it comes to U.S. Policy towards Ukraine and U.S. policy towards Europe more broadly, right? And he's making a strong entry also to rattle the various targets, but we don't know what their floor, we don't know what their bottom line is. At least I don't. I think that that they have a floor. And that they have a floor. I think one hypothesis could be that that they are ready to yield some space certainly in Ukraine, but also conceivably in Europe. But they're not ready to give the house. This is my interpretation. And by the way, and going back to your fourth question, which is not, I mean, you were saying that the aim is not decoupling, the aim is just to facilitate life for Russia. Well, I think the two are related, right? I mean, I think by doing this, Russia is suddenly less dependent on China, right? Regardless of whether that's your end game or not, just the mere fact of doing it creates that effect, right? So I mean, I imagine that the Chinese are not necessarily wild about what they are seeing, right? Yes, that also creates opportunities in Europe for them. Going back to the whole technology and economics part of the discussion that you introduced earlier, but I think my sense is that the Chinese already understand that they cannot match US influence in Europe and they cannot compete for Europe's direction with the United States. Yes, they want to minimize the extent of Europe's alignment with the United States. That's the ballgame. So there are small margins. But for China, having a strong, predictable, I mean, as strong as predictable as you can have it, relationship with Russia is a cornerstone of China's strategic approach, right? So if you play with that, or if that suddenly is in question, that creates all kinds of dilemmas for China. So if I mean, if I were in Beijing, I would be concerned.
Yes, of course. No wonder. I would be concerned as well. Yeah. So, just to wrap up, as we are, getting close to an end, the situation is very fluid, and in Poland and in Thermarium, we are really analyzing big time, and there is a feeling that we are at a major crossroads, which are bigger than the collapse of the Soviet Union, that this is the biggest shift since the Atlantic Charter, in the 40s of the 20th century, in terms of how the United States want to shape the world. And that's the consequences are not yet predictable. So let me summarize like that, Luis, and thank you for the conversation. And I look forward to talking to you again in those turbulent times. Thank you very much. Luis Simon was our
Thanks.
guest.
Thanks, Jacek. Always a pleasure.